Israel elections, Israel-Palestinian peace interim agreement, and a potential precursor to the abomination of desolation, all in the news today. And we will analyze these events on today's edition of End of the Age. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Robbins with Endtime Ministries. Thank you so much for joining me on this edition of End of the Age. Now, if you think the elections in America has been crazy this time, consider Israel. If everything plays out like they say it's going to, it's possible they could go into their fourth election in 2 years. Imagine that in the United States. 4 elections in 2 years. I mean, we're having problems getting through this one, right? But imagine 4 elections in 2 years. Well, it looks like that's where Israel is headed. So what I wanted to do is there's some prophetic aspects of this going on in the news. So let me give you a little history of what has happened, bring you up to speed today, and then we'll go off into some prophecy and talk about some other topics. So, when Donald Trump was elected president of the United States back in 2016, many people who follow and understand Bible prophecy were filled with anticipation, right? I mean, we all lived through it. We thought, well, hey, you know, especially from what he had been talking about during his run-up to the election. President Trump had promised that a peace agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians would be his #1 priority. And of course, he worked, and him and Jared Kushner, Jason Greenblatt, all of them worked very hard to make that a reality during the last 4 years. And he had a lot of success, not necessarily between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but really, you understand, the Abraham Accords in this regional agreement. Well, the Bible prophesies a peace agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians that will mark the final 7 years to the Battle of Armageddon and the second coming of Jesus Christ. That's why we watch it so closely. Because when that peace deal is struck, and it has all the characteristics, we will have started the final 7 years. You understand the gravity of that. So we watch this very closely to see, hey, when is that going to be signed? Because once that happens, Endtime Ministries is going to, a lot of things are going to happen that we have put in place that will occur after that. The magazine mailer to every home in Israel. We're going to do the door knocking campaign. A lot of things will happen during the first 3.5 years and during the 7 years as a whole. So, President Trump's peace plan, called the Deal of the Century, was ready to be launched back in January of 2019. However, Israel's government had just been toppled, if you remember what was going on back there, and the Israelis found themselves in the midst of a hotly contested election. Of course, we don't know anything about that in the United States, right? But Prime Minister Netanyahu asked President Trump to delay releasing his plan until the elections were completed. Well, President Trump agreed to postpone the publication of the plans until after Israel's election. This was April 9th of 2019. In the meantime, Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas rejected the plan before ever seeing it. And he was contending that President Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem proved that Trump was biased towards Israel and that he could not be a fair arbiter in any peace negotiations. So he said, I'm done. I don't want anything to do with it. Well, when the election results came in at that point, neither the liberals nor the conservatives had enough seats in the Knesset to establish a government. So new elections were called for September 17th, 2019. This is just a total mess. Well, President Trump still delayed the release of his plan. And the September elections again resulted in a stalemate. So consequently, we've got a third election that was held back on March 2nd of this year, 2020. So as the new election, this campaign heated up, you remember President Trump decided, hey, the time has come and I've got to release my peace initiative, this deal of the century, peace to prosperity. They had already released the economic portion with Jared Kushner in Bahrain. You remember that? Well, then in January of this year, President Trump says, hey, I've got to release the deal of the century. So the Israeli people, he wanted them to understand what they were really voting for. So President Trump released his plan back on January 28th of this year. You remember when Prime Minister Netanyahu came over and they released it there in the White House. Well, the plan called for Israeli settlements to remain a part of Israel, even though many of them would be surrounded by territory slated to become a Palestinian state. And Palestinians really would have been really good for them, the economic portion, and it may still play out. We don't know yet. But the Jordan Valley would also be adopted by Israel since it was deemed essential to Israeli security. You understand Israel, from Tel Aviv over to down into the Jordan Valley, what, 50, 60 miles maybe? Not very much at all. So Israel's not very wide, 50 miles, and only like 250, 260 miles high. So, I mean, very small. You're not talking about very much area here at all. When we fly into Israel, it's about a 45-minute drive from Israel to Jerusalem, and then it's not very much farther right down to the Jordan Valley. It's not very far at all. So really, really an hour almost, and you're all the way across. So the most important feature of the peace plan was that it took away the Palestinian veto power. In all previous Israeli-Palestinian peace negotiations, the Palestinians would simply, if they didn't like something, they'd just get up and walk out of the negotiations. And it just brought the negotiations to a complete halt. So they had kind of like a veto power over it. They would say, no, this doesn't go with the Arab Peace Initiative in 2002, and so we're just going to walk out. But under President Trump's plan, that was different. If the Palestinians refused to negotiate, then the Israelis could unilaterally declare sovereignty over 30% of the West Bank. That was including the settlements and also over the Jordan Valley. So this left Israel kind of in control, and it took the veto away.
Major internet companies are silencing and censoring Christian voices online. These companies are trying to control what you see and hear. Almost 200 videos of ours have been marked as restricted online right now. That's why we launched End of the Age Plus, a platform where the truth won't be censored, a platform where we can preach the message of the gospel. When you subscribe to End of the Age Plus today for just $12.99 a month, you can watch all of our content in a secure, easy-to-view way from your favorite device. When you go to watch.endtime.com and subscribe, you'll get instant access to all of our teaching resources, including Revelation, the Unveiling of Jesus Christ, Understanding the End Time, End Time Magazine, and so much more. We will not censor our message to comply with what the world deems as politically correct. Go to watch.endtime.com right now or search End of the Age Plus in the App Store or Google Play.
We've seen Bible prophecy fulfilled like never before. From the halls of the United Nations to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, End Time Ministries continues to reveal the Bible prophecy in the news headlines around the world every day. Whether it's through our broadcast or online at our Jerusalem Prophecy College, your gifts enable us to put vital materials in the hands of those who need it most. Because of you, we continue to replace fear with faith in the hearts of Christians around the world. We will continue to see prophecy come to pass at an even swifter pace. We need your support. Your donation of any amount enables us to continue to broadcast and be a voice in the ever-growing censored media. To become a partner or give a one-time gift, visit endtime.com or call 1-800-END-TIME right now. That's 800-363-8463. Go online now. Visit endtime.com.
So in the peace plan, once the Israelis would have declared sovereignty over 30% of the West Bank and also the Jordan Valley, then the United States would recognize this new reality. And since the U.S. has veto power at the United Nations Security Council, because you understand Resolution 2334 saying that their occupation there is illegal in the eyes of the international community, well, the U.S. has veto power at the United Nations Security Council, and the UN would be powerless to stop Israel's annexation of those new territories. So we thought, hey, this could be it. And it still could be. But the Prime Minister Netanyahu, and his political rival, Benny Gantz, believe it or not, they formed a government. I'll get to that in just a moment. But their political rival, Benny Gantz, both of them endorsed Trump's peace plan. That's very important for what's going to happen in the future. This caused the deal of the century to have limited effect during the political campaign. But during his campaign, Prime Minister Netanyahu declared that he would immediately implement President Trump's peace plan if he won the election. And of course, when Irvin, Baxter, and myself heard that, we thought, well, here we go. This is going to be it. Well, Gantz also claimed that he would implement the peace deal, but he wanted to do it with international approval. So with the Europe, Russia, the United Nations, everybody on board with it. So that was the difference. Prime Minister Netanyahu said, hey, I'm just going to go ahead with it. Well, those who were really politically savvy, they understood that the international community would never endorse President Trump's plan. So as a result, because the international community believes in a two-state solution all the way back to 67 borders with possible land swaps, but they still wanted a headquarters for the Palestinians in East Jerusalem. So as a result, the publication of the peace plan undoubtedly helped Netanyahu win the campaign in the eyes of the Israelis, right? Well, when the votes were tallied, Netanyahu's right-wing coalition had 58 seats in the Knesset. Gantz, his center-left coalition, had 55 seats, counting 15 for the Arab Joint List. And Avigdor Lieberman's Yisrael Beitenu party had 7 seats. So when President Rivlin polled the different Knesset members concerning, hey, who do you favor to lead the next government, Lieberman's party put their weight behind Benny Gantz. And this caused Rivlin to give Gantz first chance to put together a governing coalition. Well, during the campaign, Gantz solemnly promised that he would not include the Arab parties in his governing coalition. He did this because he knew Israelis did not want the Arabs to wield power in an Israeli government. Most of the Arabs did not believe Israel even has a right to exist, and that they certainly do not believe Israel should exist as a Jewish state. Furthermore, with the Arab parties enjoying 15 seats in the Knesset, they would demand key positions in any coalition that they had helped create. as kind of like a balance of power. So this means they would have access to Israel's military secrets. So, yeah, I mean, imagine that here in the United States, which it looks like we may have some of that going on here. I mean, it's almost like a mirror image of what has been going on in Israel at some point. But as soon as Rivlin appointed Gantz to put together a government, he moved immediately to include the Arabs in his coalition. And, of course, that was directly breaking a campaign promise, which politicians don't do that, right? I mean, they always follow through on their promises. I mean, come on. Well, this caused 3 of his Jewish coalition members to publicly declare, hey, that they would not vote to support Gantz's government propped up by Arab votes. And that meant that it would not be possible for Gantz to obtain the required 61 votes in the Knesset. Well, at the same time, Prime Minister Netanyahu could only assemble 58 votes in his coalition, so he couldn't reach the required 61 votes either. The only possible way to assemble a government without going back and forth or without going into a fourth election was to form a coalition government. However, the factions of Gantz's Blue and White Party had vowed to never serve in a government that was led by Benjamin Netanyahu. Well, so on March 23rd, in an announcement, Netanyahu and Gantz, they announced that they would form a unity government. Now, this is all this year, you understand. This has been a crazy year. It seems like it's been years ago that all this happened, but this was in March. So Netanyahu would serve for 1 year, a year and a half actually, and then as prime minister. After that, Gantz would serve the next year and a half as prime minister. And the two sides immediately plunged into negotiations as the details of that proposal, the unity proposal, was worked out. Well, on April 6th, journalist Amit Segal published what was supposed to be the final unity agreement. And it provided for Israel to apply sovereignty in Judea and Samaria and the Jordan Valley, and within 2.5 months. You remember we wrote the article, Irvin Baxter wrote an article July 1. I mean, we were really anticipating that this was going to happen. Gantz's party would control the Justice Department in this new coalition government, which would give them control over appointments to the Supreme Court. Netanyahu's right wing protested vigorously against the Blue and White's control of the Justice Department. The Yamina party had worked diligently to break the liberal hold on the Supreme Court. Well, now it appeared that it was all going down the drain, right? The pressure on Netanyahu caused him to backtrack on signing the agreement. He demanded that Gantz renegotiate the agreement concerning the Justice Department. I mean, it's just crazy how much this is almost mirrored to what's going on in the United States. I know there's two different dynamics, but still, this has been the craziest year, I think, of my entire life. So what happened? Well, in late April, Prime Minister Netanyahu and Benny Gantz signed the deal to form a coalition government. And Israel sighed just a big sigh of relief. They finally took a breath and said, wow, it's finally over with after 3 elections. Well, it's not over with yet. So at that point, the Jerusalem Post reported that, hey, the United States President Donald Trump's peace plan, including its clauses enabling Israel to apply sovereignty in Judea and Samaria, will be able to be implemented in July. You remember when the mapping committees were mapping everything out, the settlements, I mean, right down to the roads, which road would go to which settlement, even to the different fields and everything. I mean, they were mapping everything out to the square inch. Well, they said that, hey, everything will be ready for Israel to implement their sovereignty in July when those mapping committees were set to be finalized. Well, now we know, of course, that this never materialized. The Jerusalem Post reported that Israel and the United States agreed to suspend the plans to annex the West Bank settlements in exchange for normalization deals between Israel and both Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. And there's been other concessions you've known from then till now. So now it appears, believe it or not, Israel's headed to a fourth election in 2 years, unless just a miracle happens. So the Israel Hayam reported today that the right is livid with Gantz because he said that Jerusalem has room for a Palestinian capital. So in a rare interview, now I told you all that about the election to bring you up to where we're at right now, fixing to go into a fourth election. And a lot of what we're talking about now could determine which one gets elected and what happens in a future peace agreement. So in this rare interview, and remember that I told you over the last couple days that it has to be an Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement that starts the final 7 years. Now, a lot of people don't understand the difference in the Abraham Accords and this Israel-Palestinian peace agreement. But you remember that the international community, Israel, the Palestinians, the Arabs that are signing these normalization deals, they all recognize that for there to be a final peaceful solution in the Middle East, it's all going to come down to the Israelis and the Palestinians. And the Bible also tells us that's the 5 clues, the 5 characteristics of that peace agreement have to do with the Israel and the Palestinians. So that's what brings me to my topic right now. And that's why I wanted to give you a history of what's been going on with the elections. We're going into the fourth elections now. In a rare interview to the Saudi news outlet Ashrak al-Aswat, Blue and White leader and Defense Minister Benny Gantz says that he does not envision a full Middle East peace without the Palestinians. When asked about the status of Jerusalem, Gantz was quoted, and I'm quoting when I say this, Gantz said, well, Jerusalem must remain united, and we know from the prophecies of the Bible that that will be the case, but it will include a place for a Palestinian capital. It is a very big city and full of places sacred to us all. Imagine a capital in the city of Jerusalem. Now, we know that President Trump talked about them having a capital on the other side of the defense barrier, that big wall that they have built. And so that's probably what will occur. But it's still Jerusalem, right there, I should say, Abu Dis, right around in that area. So Gantz told this news source that the process with the Arab world is true and great opportunity. Now, you understand here, this is what I've been talking about, that the Abraham Accords and the Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement, 2 totally different things. Those could lead to, because the Arabs have the ability to kind of pressure the Palestinians to some extent. But Gantz here is saying that, hey, what's happening with the Arab world is true and great opportunity, the Abraham Accords. He said, because I want to reach an agreement with the Palestinians. So it all could lead to an agreement that starts the final 7 years. But you have to understand, like with the normalization between Israel and Bahrain, it's not the one leading to the final 7 years because it doesn't have the 5 characteristics. So I want you to understand the whole dynamic, the geopolitical situation going on across the Middle East. They all recognize it has to come back to the Israelis and the Palestinians. So Gantz has said, hey, I want to reach an agreement between the Palestinians, even though the Abraham Accords are a good thing, we still have to do something with the Palestinians. He said, I'm sure, and I'm quoting, I'm sure that without them there will be no full comprehensive peace. I call on them to cooperate with me and with the Arab partner states so that they will have a place of honor in the new peace process. Gantz was asked if he was willing to pay the price for peace and if it is possible to discuss and end, now this is what the Palestinians want, an end to their occupation and the establishment of an independent Palestinian state along the 67 borders, which would cut East Jerusalem and the Temple Mount off of the Israeli proper. Okay, Israel's never going to do that. And they said, would you really be willing to do that? Go back to 67 borders with an exchange of territories and a solution to the core issues of the conflict. That's going to come down to the Temple Mount, I promise you. But they said such as Jerusalem and a right of return for the Palestinian refugees, or whether the old thinking is still in place. Well, Benny Gantz, the leader of the blue and white, and the alternate prime minister, you understand the situation I just went through with the coalition government. He's serving in a coalition government right now with Prime Minister Netanyahu. He said that the Palestinians want and deserve an entity in which they can live independently. He recognized that. Prime Minister Netanyahu recognizes that. Well, when he was asked if he was referring to a state, Benny Gantz said, well, let them call it what they want, a state or an empire. He said they have the right to feel independent and have their own capital and a solution to all the issues, even Jerusalem. He said, we must speak in a new contemporary language about ways to a solution, not stick to the traditional discourse. He said, for our part, we want to separate from them and their promises of security. If we can agree on security issues, the political solution will come easily. That's Israel's main point right there, is they want to make sure that they have a homeland in the Middle East, but they also have to be able to secure that. If they can't secure it, then what's the point, right? And if you go back to 67 borders, you're going to go back to where it's just very short, just a few miles right there at the belly, totally indefensible. So that's one of their main things right now is the security issues, and this is what Gantz is talking about.
Move Mountains with Irvin Baxter. This book by Irvin's grandson provides 30 days of devotion that will enhance your relationship with God and others. Authentic illustrations from early morning devotions at Endtime will help you find your purpose and eliminate fears. Commit to taking this 30-day journey and experience real life change. Get your book for only $14.99. Call 1-800-363-8463 or go to endtime.com/move.
Major internet companies are silencing and censoring Christian voices online. These companies are trying to control what you see and hear. Almost 200 videos of ours have been marked as restricted online right now. That's why we launched End of the Age Plus, a platform where the truth won't be censored, a platform where we can preach the message of the gospel. When you subscribe to End of the Age Plus today for just $12.99 a month, you can watch all of our content in a secure, easy-to-view way from your favorite device. When you go to watch.endtime.com and subscribe, you'll get instant access to all of our teaching resources, including Revelation, the Unveiling of Jesus Christ, Understanding the End Time, End Time Magazine, and so much more. We will not censor our message to comply with what the world deems as politically correct. Go to watch.endtime.com right now or search End of the Age Plus in the App Store or Google Play.
If your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the archive button.
So, if you understand Bible prophecy and understand what's coming with the peace agreement, you know that they're talking about most of the issues right here. And Benny Gantz is saying, hey, they need to have they need to have their own state, they can have a capital, we can discuss Jerusalem, all of the salient issues. But that's not the part yet I want you to hear. This is a lot of it, but I'm going to get to something really good here in just a moment. But I want to get through the rest of this article really quick. Benny Gantz, this interview, I should say, Benny Gantz went on to say we must not only solve those problems, but also cooperate fully on an economy with the Palestinians. Now, I don't know how this is going to work. we'll let them deal with all that. I'm focused on the prophetic part of it. But he said we've got to have cooperation with the economy, science, technology, education, and everything. He said this is a historic opportunity. Well, that's working pretty good with Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates and some of the others. But with the Palestinians, I don't think it's ever going to work out. And it's going to turn into something not so good right there at the very end. You understand the Great Tribulation and everything that's going to happen there. So when Benny Gantz was asked about the future borders, Gantz told the Saudi news outlet that Israel needed the Jordan Valley to ensure its own security, but would not necessarily declare sovereignty in 30% of the territory. So he might be willing to give up more, which the Palestinians would like. He said, and I'm quoting, "We opposed the annexation plan from the beginning." So he did. Not Prime Minister Netanyahu, but Benny Gantz. He was referring to his party, and he said before the United Arab Emirates made its demand and Prime Minister Netanyahu agreed to freeze it, we opposed regulating settlement outposts. We want a Palestinian entity to have an appropriate geographic size that will allow a comfortable life without obstacles. Now, listen at this part. He said, what we are demanding is security. We want to be able to secure Israel. We need strategic points of security. Of course, we can talk about an exchange of territories, although I don't see what and where. He said, what we are saying that the 67 borders will not be reinstated. In other words, we're not going back to 67 lines. They're going to go back to something like that with land swaps is what he's talking about. But listen at this. He says, but there is always the possibility of an interim agreement. Not a permanent agreement, but we could sign an interim agreement just to get us by for a few years, right? What's the Bible talk about? A 7-year time period, an interim agreement. Irvin Baxter and myself, Irvin Baxter's been talking about this for decades now. An interim agreement would be signed. Benny Gantz actually states that we may not be able to solve every issue and set all the borders, but there is the possibility of an interim agreement. I'm quoting from that. And he says, what is important is to keep the process alive. So when I saw this interim agreement, I thought, well, hold on a second. Both Prime Minister Netanyahu and Benny Gantz. I know Benny Gantz has called for an interim agreement. Many of them have called for an interim agreement. And I'm sure that Prime Minister Netanyahu would be for that as well. I can't quote that right now. So in the prophecy of Daniel's 70 weeks, she said, what's so big about an interim agreement, the 7-year agreement? Okay. In the prophecy of Daniel's 70 weeks, Daniel 9:24 through 27, God is telling us that there will be 70 7-year periods of time in the prophecy. How do we know that each of the sevens is a 7-year period? Well, Daniel 9:27 says, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. The Antichrist, who's coming from Europe, will confirm this covenant with many for a 7-year period. It's going to be an interim agreement. If it was a permanent agreement, it would just say the Antichrist confirms the covenant. But it doesn't say that. It says the Antichrist will confirm the covenant for 1 week or a 7-year period. So it's going to be an interim agreement. We can't agree on all the salient issues now. We may have to put 1 or 2 of them off till a future time. It's an interim agreement. And this is what Benny Gantz just called for. He said, and the Bible says, and in the midst of the week, this is Daniel 9:27, in the midst of that week, or in the midst of that 7-year period, the Antichrist shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations, he maketh it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured out upon the desolate. So, in Daniel 9:27, it states that the event called the abomination of desolation will occur in the midst, in the last half of the, or in the midst of the last 7-year period. You say, well, how do you know how long? How do you know it's a 7 year? Well, if we can tell how long the last half of this 7 is, then all we have to do is multiply by 2 to know how long the full period of the 7 is, right? Well, that's pretty easy to do. Jesus told his disciples in Matthew 24:15 through 21 that the abomination of desolation would start the Great Tribulation. He said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, let them which be in Judea flee. Then in verse 21 he says, for then shall be great tribulation, such as never been before, never shall be again. Well, we know exactly how long the Great Tribulation is. There are 6 specific scriptures that say the Great Tribulation lasts 3.5 years. I know a lot of people teach that it's a 7-year period. There are no scriptures in the Bible for that. When we're talking about this final 7-year period, Jesus specifically said the Great Tribulation would last that final 3.5-year period. So what are the 6 scriptures? Daniel 7:25, Revelation 13:5, Daniel 12:7, Revelation 11:2, Revelation 11:3, and Revelation 12:14. 6 scriptures letting us know the Great Tribulation is 3.5 years long. Sometimes it says times, and half a time. Sometimes it says 42 months. Sometimes it says 1,260 days. All of those equal 3.5 years. So what does that mean? Well, if the last half of the last 7 is 3.5 years, then the first half has to be 3.5 years, right? So that means the entire 70th, Daniel's 70th week, or the entire 70th 7 is 7 years long. Now, obviously, the other 69 sevens are, each of those are 7 years long too, is right? So, this lets us know that we are looking at, in Daniel's 70-week prophecy, we're actually looking at a 7-year periods of time, 77-year periods of time, and 7 years times 70 is 490 years. So the entire prophecy, 490 years, but there are gaps. Okay, I'm not going to get into all that today, but I will in the future again to make sure you guys know what is going on here. But what you and I are interested in is not the first 2 segments, but we're interested in the last segment, the last 7-year period. It's going to be an interim agreement. This is what Benny Gantz just said. Hey, we may not be able to solve everything, but there is the possibility we could sign an interim agreement. How long does the Bible say that that agreement will last? 7 years. Okay? Are we in the end time? Absolutely. That interim agreement, you understand, was prophesied about 2,500 years ago. And now, look at what's happening. With all the other prophecies, it's easy to tell we're living in the end time, right? Well, the Jerusalem Post went on to report that Gantz says there's room in Jerusalem for a Palestinian capital. So they say that the international community and the Palestinians hold that the East Jerusalem, including the Old City, now this is what's the mindset of the international community, that has the Old City of Jerusalem. Think about that, right there by the Temple Mount. That should be the future capital of a Palestinian state. Israel believes that a united Jerusalem should remain in the hands of as the capital of the Jewish state. Prophecy tells us that that's exactly what's going to happen. Zechariah 14:2, when the world governing armies come down against Jerusalem, they will capture half the city, which means up until that point, all the way through this 7-year agreement, Israel has retained control of the entire city. So all of these prophecies are playing out just perfectly, like they always do. So Benny Gantz's words, however, are consistent with President Trump's peace plan. And that allowed Israel to maintain sovereignty over territory in Jerusalem within the boundaries of this security barrier. Remember the big wall I was talking about? If you go out of, when we go to on the tours to Israel, when you go out of Jerusalem and we're going to go to Bethlehem, it's only not just a very short drive, 5-10 miles, and you get there and there is this giant concrete wall. Just goes on as far as you can see. You got to go through that wall, the barrier, to get into Bethlehem. There's a checkpoint there. All the buses, everybody goes through that. That's the barrier that President Trump is talking about. And that this peace agreement also placed areas of municipal Jerusalem outside that barrier within the boundaries of a future Palestinian state. So this is all what's going on. This is happening in your news. It's been happening for a while now. That's why I wanted to go through the elections and what was going on, and President Trump releasing his peace plan earlier this year. And now you know kind of what's going on. And it's very important. Israel fixing to go into their 4th elections. And who knows what's going to happen in just the very near future. I know prophetically what's going to happen. But as far as how all this plays out with the United States election and everything, that's still up in the air, right? So, you understand that this interim agreement, that's one of the main reasons I wanted to go through all of that. Because this is exactly what the Bible says. And it's been proposed before, this interim agreement. So, the Daniel 9:27 prophecy is the reason I wanted to bring up another topic. Now we're going to get off the peace agreement and I'm going to switch gears on you. In Daniel 9:27, beyond the peace agreement, the Bible says, he shall confirm the covenant with many for a week. That's the peace agreement. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. For the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate. It's the abomination of desolation, even until the consummation, that determined shall be poured out upon the desolate. What is it meant by the stopping of the sacrifices? Well, the Middle East peace agreement is going to place the Temple Mount under a sharing arrangement between Muslims and Jews, according to Revelation 11:1 and 2. Israel will be allowed to build her 3rd temple without disturbing the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Those are the Muslim holy places. When the temple's completed, animal sacrifices will be offered just like they were in the Old Testament for the atonement for sins. That's what the Jews believe today. These are the sacrifices that the Antichrist will stop, probably at the urging of the animal rights activists, but the Antichrist will probably feel like that as well. And it's that. And I tell you what, when we get back from the break, I'll explain to you why I think that. Because we know that it's the Antichrist. I mean, there are other prophecies that tell us the Antichrist, the one who stops the sacrifices, is going to come to Europe. Well, I'm going to tell you what's going on in Europe right now that leads me to believe that.
Most of us walk around day by day blind to the prophecies being fulfilled right before us. Every news report brings a new piece to the puzzle in the race towards the final 7 years and the second coming of Jesus Christ. Now, more than ever, it is important for God's people to understand the times in which we are living. On November the 12th, 2013, we opened our Jerusalem Prophecy College in downtown Jerusalem. These same courses are now available online for people who are unable to attend the classes in person. We welcome students to join us and discover the link between current events and the prophecies of the Bible. Take your place in the prophecy of Daniel 11:33. Enroll in the Jerusalem Prophecy College today. Go to JerusalemProphecyCollege.com.
So, let me set the stage really quick before we go into this next segment here. The Antichrist. Going to be a political leader that comes from Europe, but he's going to be the leader of the world government at this point. He's going to stand in the temple of God, proclaiming to be God, and he's going to cause the sacrifices to stop. So what's going to be his mindset there? Yes, he is going to say, stop these. You don't need these because I'm the ultimate authority here. I'm God. Look to me. But consider something that's going on in Europe right now. And he might have this might be one of the things that kind of leads up to this. This is a possible potential precursor to the stopping of the sacrifices. A European court of justice just approved a Belgian kosher slaughter ban. So, the laws requiring animals to be stunned before they are slaughtered strikes a fair balance between animal welfare, now this is what they're actually thinking about, animal welfare and religious freedom, okay? So, now again, this is in Europe. This is going to be the origin of the Antichrist. So he's probably somewhere in Europe right now, alive on the earth, because we don't have too many years before all this stuff's going to transpire. But the European Union Court of Justice upheld a ban on kosher and halal slaughter in Belgium in a ruling released on Thursday. The court dismissed arguments by Jewish and Muslim groups that Belgium is infringing on their rights by requiring them to stun animals in the process of slaughtering them for meat, something contrary to their religious precepts. So the ruling sets a precedent that could lead to a wave of laws across the European Union against shahita, this Jewish ritual slaughter. So the European regulations ban slaughter without pre-stunning, but make an exception for religious slaughter. But at the same time, those regulations state that countries can set their own laws to reduce animal suffering. So the court determined that the laws requiring animals to be stunned strikes a fair balance between, to be struck between the animal, or the importance attached to the animal's welfare and the freedom of Jewish and Muslim believers to manifest their religion. The reason the court gave the law being balanced is so that it allows for this reversible stunning. Court also said that the law limits one specific aspect of the ritual act of slaughter, not the act of slaughter itself. This is going to be very important. And as such, it does not count as interference with religious practice. But it absolutely does. In other words, you bring a cow in there to slaughter it, and they want you to use a stun gun, stun the thing before you kill it. Okay? Well, that's against Jewish kosher law. Mainstream Jewish and Muslim authorities do not permit any form of stunning the animal before slaughtering the animals for meat. And such that the court has determined that outlawing the production of meat for those communities is a fair balance between animal rights and the rights of Jews and Muslims. So that interference in ritual slaughter meets an objective of general interest recognized by the European Union, namely the promotion of animal welfare. That's what the court stated. But an Israeli ambassador to Belgium, Emmanuel Nishan, he said that the ruling is a catastrophic decision. It's a blow to Jewish life in Europe. And apparently, tolerance and diversity are empty words in the eyes of some Europeans. So here's the point. A Russian chief rabbi, Pinchas Goldschmidt, he's the president of the Conference of European Rabbis. He said that Thursday's decision flies in the face of recent statements from the European institutions that Jewish life is to be treasured and respected. The European Court of Justice decision to enforce the ban on non-stun slaughter in the Flanders and Wallonia regions of Belgium was felt by the Jewish communities across the continent. The bans have already had a devastating impact on the Belgian Jewish community, causing supply shortages during the pandemic, and we are all aware of the precedent this sets. This is very important, the precedents that this sets, which challenges our rights to practice our religion. That's one of the main points I wanted to bring out. Because the court realizes that the Jews, according to their religion, they don't want to stun the animal. But the court has said, hey, we're not keeping you from sacrificing, so it doesn't matter about your religious rituals. This is what we're going to pass. And the rabbis are saying this is going to spread across Europe. And it's going to affect the Jewish religious part of this. We can't do this. Goldschmidt said that historically, bans on religious slaughter have been an attempt to control a country's population and can be traced back to the 1800s when Switzerland attempted to stop Jews fleeing pogroms from entering their country, as well as to Nazi Germany. So you understand what's going on here. Europe is looking at this Jewish, their religious rituals that they are holding to, and they're saying, hey, you know, we're not saying you can't sacrifice. We're not saying you can't kill animals. We just don't want you stunning them. There's passing regulations against this. And the Jews are saying, well, you might as well be saying we can't slaughter because according to our religious traditions, we can't stun an animal. It can't be defective before we kill it. It can't be stunned. So it's really become quite a mess. And when you look at this compared to the abomination of desolation, the Antichrist is going to come from Europe, and he's going to cause those sacrifices to cease in the future as well. The Bible tells us that. Daniel 9:27 foretells the abomination of desolation. The abomination of desolation, it appears many times in Scripture. In Matthew 24:15, Jesus said that the abomination of desolation would stand in the holy place. The holy place is the temple, or at least in that area on the Temple Mount. And the Apostle Paul described it in more detail in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3 through 4. He said the second coming of Jesus Christ would not occur until the man of sin, the son of perdition, the Antichrist, would be revealed. And he went on to say that the Antichrist would actually sit in the temple of God, claiming to be God. Well, where does the abomination of desolation occur? In the temple. And the abomination of desolation is when the Antichrist will stand in the temple proclaiming to be God himself. It's talked about many times. So what's going to happen? He's going to cause the sacrifices to cease. And that's what's happening in Europe right now with the religious traditions. All this is going to be religious rituals and things that are going on by the Jews at the temple. The Antichrist is going to say, no, he's already going to have it in his mind because it's happening in Europe, you understand? Now we know that we talked about the abomination of desolation. We know how to read and understand Daniel 9:27, right? The Antichrist is going to confirm a covenant with many for this interim agreement, this 7-year period. And then there's going to be the abomination of desolation, the Antichrist causing the sacrifices to cease, standing in the temple, claiming to be God. So when in the near future, when we see a peace treaty signed between the Israelis and the Palestinians, which confirms Israel's right to a homeland in the Middle East, places the Temple Mount under a sharing arrangement, allows the Israelis to build the third temple, and that's the beginning of the final 7 years to the Battle of Armageddon. In the middle of that final 7-year period, this interim agreement, the Antichrist is going to stop those sacrifices. What are they trying to do to the Jews right now in Europe? Now, the article I just went through was Belgium. But the rabbis are saying, well, this is going to spread all over Europe. It's going to be the mindset. The Antichrist is coming from Europe. So the Antichrist is going to stop the sacrifices because he will not care about the Jews' religious rituals and their practices. He could care less about that. He's going to say, I'm God. I'm the Messiah you've been looking for. You don't need those sacrifices. And the Bible says that he's going to stand in the rebuilt temple. He's going to proclaim to be God. And that event's going to be the abomination of desolation, which begins the final 3.5 years to the Battle of Armageddon. And this final 3.5 years is what Jesus called the Great Tribulation. So you understand, a possible precursor to the eventual abomination of desolation, we've got to talk about this stuff because we're dealing with the prophecies of the Bible here. The Antichrist is going to cause the sacrifices to cease. So it's all playing out right before our very eyes. Europe doesn't care about the Jews sacrificing ritual of not wanting to stun their animal. They don't care about that. They don't care about the Jewish religious practices. And the Antichrist won't either. Where's he coming from? Europe. So then we also know that there's going to be the sharing of the Temple Mount. Revelation 11, 1 and 2. John said, "And there was given unto me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise, measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein. But the court which is without the temple, leave it out, and measure it not. For it's given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months." So he's not talking about the first temple. He's not talking about the second temple. John prophesied about a second temple. So John was saying, just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ, the Temple Mount will be placed under a sharing arrangement, probably under a United Nations supervision. And so the Jerusalem Post reported recently that the UN support drops for speaking of the Temple Mount as solely a Muslim site. A small group of 10 countries, including Israel, opposed the text. By 147 nations remained in favor of a resolution. And the support has dropped slightly at the United Nations for this General Assembly resolution that referenced the Temple Mount, which is the most holy site in Judaism, as solely the Muslim site Al-Haram al-Sharif. And Liberia changed its vote from absent to when the UN General Assembly voted on their annual resolution in New York just a few days ago. And so what you see just a really small changing of a change in direction here. Now, it's not an overwhelming change by any means. But we do know there will come a time when the Antichrist will confirm the covenant, confirm Israel's right to exist, and all these different characteristics. He's going to confirm that for an interim agreement. So maybe it appears in the beginning he's on Israel's side, and then there's going to come a time when he turns. However, he's going to be the leader of the world government, which is totally anti-Israel. So he's going to come on a message of peace, but yet he's going to have all of this ulterior motives in the back of his mind, and he's going to end up to be not so nice of a person, to say it mildly. So all these things playing out in the news right now. I've got so much I could go over with you. I wish I had 2 or 3 hours. So much about world government, world religion, and different things going on, efforts towards precursors to the mark of the beast. But we'll have to wait till tomorrow to get back into some of it. Looking forward to Open Line. God bless each and every one of you. Have a great afternoon.
This has been End of the Age, brought to you by the faithful partners of Endtime Ministries. If you're not currently a partner with Endtime Ministries, or if you would like more information, we invite you to call us at 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463, or visit us online at endtime.com.
Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our Facebook page.